Welcome to the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. We offer you independent voices and underreported stories about topics you won't hear anywhere else. Join us as we delve into the deeper issues behind the news stories of the day on the MTC Report.
You know, here in Switzerland, President Trump wants to be talking trade. He wants to be doing deal making in Davos, but instead he is talking about the Russia investigation, facing new questions about whether he tried to fire the special counsel. And already here today in Switzerland, the president's pushing back.
Fake news, folks. Fake news.
This morning, the president downplaying new details about a stunning showdown inside the West Wing. A source close to the White House telling NBC News Donald Trump ordered the administration's lawyer to fire special counsel Robert Mueller in June. NBC News has learned that lawyer, Don McGahn, refused and even threatened to quit rather than ask the Justice Department to dismiss Mueller. The president ultimately backing down and just months later denying he ever considered getting rid of Mueller in the first place.
I haven't given it any thought. I mean, I've been reading about it from you people. You say, oh, I'm going to dismiss him. No, I'm not dismissing anybody.
Overnight, word of the near firing, first reported by the New York Times, had Democrats livid.
These reports are absolutely stunning, deeply frightening, because they show, again, that the president will stop at nothing to protect himself from this obstruction of justice investigation.
A White House lawyer tells NBC, "We decline to comment out of respect for the office of the special counsel and its process." President Trump unable to escape the shadow of the Russia investigation, even an ocean away, making his Davos debut in Switzerland. That's where this morning he's apologizing, conditionally, for retweeting inflammatory anti-Muslim videos from a far-right British group. That controversial retweet earned him a rare rebuke from Prime Minister Theresa May at the time. Now, in Davos, alongside her, the president is insisting the allies' special relationship is not on the rocks.
So that was a little bit of a false rumor out there.
Today, among the global elite gathered in this Swiss ski town, Donald Trump's set to deliver the first speech from a sitting U.S. president at this summit since Bill Clinton in 2000. A senior administration official says you can expect to hear the president hammer home that the U.S. is open for business. The president will be back in Washington tonight, clearly with a lot on his plate. And by the way, also working on that State of the Union speech coming up quick Tuesday at the Capitol. Hoda, Savannah?
Allie, let's go back for a second to the president wanting to fire Mueller. Put that in context for us. How big of a deal is it? Does it change the investigation?
Well, so remember where this has been going for months now. For a while, Democrats have said that if the president did actually fire the special counsel, that would be crossing a red line. Even some Republicans have said the president couldn't possibly be thinking of it because of how problematic it would be. And this is, of course, with those denials from the president and his aides that he was even considering dismissing Robert Mueller. So, yes, this is potentially significant. Now, that said, remember where we are at this moment. Robert Mueller is still on the job. The president did not fire him or have Don McGahn, that White House lawyer, fire him. And Don McGahn is still on the job, too, guys, at least for now. Hoda, Savannah?
All right, Hallie Jackson in Davos.
Considering firing Robert Mueller?
No, not at all.
Does the president commit to not firing Robert Mueller?
The president has not even discussed that.
I haven't given it any thought. I mean, I've been reading about it from you people. You say, oh, I'm going to dismiss him. No, I'm not dismissing anybody. I mean, I want them to get on with the task. But I also want the Senate and the House to come out with their findings.
Hi, this is Mark Taylor-Canfield, and this is the MTC Report. I've been a writer at the Huffington Post and also have a blog at Daily Kos. I have a column at the Capitol Hill Times, and I'm a regular guest on the Jeff Santos Show, broadcasting from Boston across the country. I wanted to talk today about something that I think is really important because the last period has brought out a lot of insight into the investigation by Robert Mueller of the Trump administration. And so this question I want to address today has to do with, will the president be indicted? Now, we do know that the Mueller investigation has reached the top level and has now got interest in interviewing Trump. The question is, has Donald Trump been guilty of obstruction of justice? That's the question. It's a very important question, and it has to do with James Comey's testimony, saying that he felt that the president fired him because of his handling of the FBI's investigation of the Trump administration. Now, that's obstruction of justice. When you try to hinder an investigation into your own administration, that is obstruction of justice, folks. I'm just saying, straight up, okay? As they say in New York, I'm not saying, I'm just saying. And I've been saying this for quite a while. All right, so here's the latest update on this story. And here's a story from CNN, okay? Stephen Collinson. Finally, inexorably, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation has clawed all the way to Donald Trump himself. Now a foreboding moment looms for his presidency and for the nation. A stunning barrage of revelations on Tuesday suggested that at least one strand of Mueller's Russia probe is racing towards its endgame, emphasizing the gravity of the situation facing the White House and the potential vulnerability of the president. Mueller's request to question Trump and news that his team has already interviewed fired FBI Director James Comey and Attorney General Jeff Sessions indicate that the special counsel has a clear picture of where he's headed and what could turn into an obstruction of justice case. This is according to some legal experts, according to CNN. It's possible that Mueller is closing in on his determination about what obstruction looks like, whether it is a criminal offense in his mind, whether it is an impeachable offense, or whether it amounts to nothing. Michael Zeldin, a former senior aide to Mueller at the Justice Department, told CNN's Brooke Baldwin. So these new revelations came amid signs that Trump is still pushing up against constitutional norms in his conduct towards judicial authorities, usually seen as independent of the president. When the Justice Department hires a special counsel, or appoints a special counsel, excuse me, to investigate allegations of interference in the U.S. elections and the Trump administration's ties with Russia, well, if the president tries to interfere with that investigation or fire that special counsel, then it's obstruction of justice. He's trying to stop an investigation into his own deeds or the deeds of his staff or advisors. So the current FBI Director Christopher Wray apparently threatened to quit, and that was according to a source familiar with the situation. They told CNN that after coming under pressure from Sessions to clean out senior leadership figures dating from the Comey era, who the president believes are biased against him, that pressure was put on Christopher Wray and he threatened to quit. And that development was first reported by Axios. The Washington Post reported that Trump then asked the acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who he voted for in the 2016 election, during an introductory Oval Office meeting, and he also criticized McCabe's wife and her Democratic Party affiliations in a move that infringed customary treatment of a civil servant. And that's according to Stephen Collinson at CNN. And there are signs, according to Collinson, that Rick Gates, the former Trump campaign staffer who pleaded not guilty in October to 8 charges of money laundering and failing to register foreign lobbying and other business, may be ready to cooperate with Mueller. That's CNN's Caitlin Polance reported that. So during this day, during this intense drama that was going on, efforts by the Republicans to discredit the Russia probe gathered a lot of momentum, as the White House said Trump was ready to declassify a memo written by GOP committee staff in the House claiming misconduct by FBI officials investigating the president. 4 Trump associates so far have been charged in the Mueller investigation, but there is still neither proof of wrongdoing by the president nor indications of the special counsel's eventual conclusions in this matter. Yet the prospect of the President of the United States testifying to the investigation would lift the intrigue to an unprecedented level and would be a spectacle not seen since Bill Clinton's grand jury appearance 20 years ago that led to his eventual impeachment over an affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky. The fact that Mueller's team has already spoken to Comey and Sessions and now wants to talk to the president suggests that the investigation into whether Trump obstructed justice by asking the former FBI director to go easy on former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and then fired Comey when he refused to, this might be where this investigation is focused, right? CNN also reported last week that Trump's former top political advisor, Steve Bannon, had struck a deal as well to be interviewed by Mueller's prosecutors. So according to Jens David Olin, a professor and vice dean at Cornell Law School, quote, "It seems to indicate that the investigation is in its 11th hour," unquote. So this professor, Olin, said that the seniority of those questions points to Mueller reaching a defining moment, at least in the obstruction of justice portion of his investigation. That actually is also considering whether anyone in the Trump campaign broke the law by cooperating with a Russian election meddling effort. But it strikes some that they're getting close to coming out with a new tact with this investigation. The interview that happened with Steve Bannon suggests that Mueller is proceeding in a classic fashion, working his way from the broadest point of the investigation to the key figure, with Trump at the top of that. So Trump, of course, has consistently denied any collusion with Russia, has said that he did not obstruct justice in firing Comey, and he's branded the entire episode as nothing but a, quote, hoax and a, quote, witch hunt. So the fact that Robert Mueller has come to this part of the case suggests that he believes, at the very least, according to CNN and Stephen Collinson, that something is there in the possible obstruction case. And that seems to be supported by Professor from Cornell Law School. So these latest reports shed new light on Trump's potential exposure, noting that the special counsel's office has indicated it wants to talk to Trump about Flynn's resignation and Comey's dismissal. So the Washington Post also said that Mueller was interested in Trump's efforts to remove Sessions or to pressure him into quitting, quoting a source familiar with the investigation as saying that the special counsel wanted to assess whether there was a, quote, pattern, unquote, of behavior by the president. Still, as Mueller has shown, for instance, in surprise indictments and plea deals last year, no one outside of his investigation can accurately assess his intentions at this point. So Trump's lawyers could offer written answers from the president to the special counsel's question, a step many legal analysts suspect will not go far enough for Mueller's investigation. Another option might be a formal interview with Trump's lawyers present, which then would allow them to restrain their star witness, who, according to CNN, is often voluble and imprecise and economical with the truth in a way that could lead him into jeopardy from Mueller's crack team of prosecutors. So refusing Mueller's request could force the special counsel to subpoena the president to testify before a grand jury, a step that would certainly put him in an even more perilous situation and is also unprecedented.
Everybody, can you move?
You got it, Tom?
Yep. Everybody come down.
Cody's got it.
Yes, go ahead. Get ahead of him.
Right here.
Can't get ahead. Can we get ahead? Thank you. Excuse me.
Mr. President, did you order Mueller fired? Mr. President, did you seek to fire Mueller? You want to fire Robert Mueller?
Fake news, folks. Fake news.
What's your message today?
Typical New York Times fake stories.
Mr. Trump.
Our message is peace and prosperity. That's what we have. And we have a tremendous crowd, and a crowd like they've never had before. Actually told me this is a crowd like they have never had before in Davos, including all of you people like they've never had before. So that's good. I assume they're here because of clout.
How confident your message will be well received? How confident are you?
I think it's going to be very well received. It's a very positive message. The United States is doing fantastically well, better than we've done in decades. The stock markets are incredible. Businesses are coming back into the United States. I think it's going to be a great message that people are going to like hearing.
Did you try and fire Robert Mueller?
Thank you. Fake news. Where is it?
What are the terms being negotiated right now for this interview? It's a very difficult process, I would imagine.
Sure. So my colleague Carol Lenig and I just reported that President Trump's lawyers have been in touch with Mueller's team on several different issues, but they want to question the president on the firing of Mike Flynn and the firing of Jim Comey, and that the negotiations include whether this part of the interview could be in writing, whether part of the interview would be videotaped, but they want the interview to happen soon. And what it shows is that there's an intensifying focus on the obstruction part of the probe and the president's actions regarding these firings. Separately, we're reporting that they've begun asking witnesses about the repeated efforts to oust Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General. We've reported in others there were multiple efforts to get him to resign, a public smear campaign, a lot of pressure from President Trump's allies. And Mueller's team seems interested in knowing why is that so?
And how close might Mueller be to actually sitting down with President Trump? Are we talking about months, weeks, days?
A lot of it depends on the negotiations with President Trump's lawyers. We're expecting those to begin and increase as soon as next week, and then after that, you're seeing today they reported, New York Times, we reported they've interviewed Jeff Sessions. They're kind of wrapping up some of the key figures in the probe, and we're expecting President Trump's interview could be before too long.
Let me say it again. I believe health care is a right of all people. I will fight for a Medicare for all single-payer system. Second of all, right, you want to talk about rationing? You got 29 million people in this country who have no health insurance. How's that for rationing? They can't go to the doctor.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
As I've reported before, there are many questions about whether a standing president can be indicted and charged with crimes. And I maintain, along with some law professors, which you can check out in my last MTC report, my previous MTC report, these law professors have found that there is no temporary immunity in the U.S. Constitution for a standing president. So I also find, no prohibition on indicting or charging a sitting president. In general, when it came to Leon Jaworski with the Watergate case and Richard Nixon, or in Ken Starr's investigation during the Clinton administration, they chose to let the president be impeached rather than bring those charges out, while he was in office. And that is what might be considered common law, but a common federal law, but is actually, there's no written law that says that that the president is immune from prosecution. So we also know that Mueller has the benefit of some notes and memos written by Comey after several meetings with the president, in which he detailed what he later said was an effort by the president to develop an inappropriate relationship of patronage with him. So if you look at the testimony of James Comey before the Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, you will see that he is trying to get across this idea that it was improper, his firing was improper, and that it directly had to do with his investigation of the Trump administration's ties with Russia. So, there you go. Now, that is a pretty clear example of obstruction of justice, and I think James Comey was trying to tell the entire nation that. And now Mueller is, going to be interviewing President Trump. So, here we go. Trump said last year that he would be 100% willing to testify before Mueller under oath. And CNN reported that some of the president's friends and associates warned him not to put himself in legal jeopardy, by voluntarily submitting to interviews. So who knows? Earlier this month, Trump appeared to walk back on the prospect of meeting with Mueller. So who knows? White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said that the White House is, quote, fully cooperative, unquote, with Mueller, but believes that the American people are ready to move on. But a new CNN poll appeared to counter that last assertion, finding that 8 in 10 people said that Trump should testify. If Mueller is asked, if he's asked by Mueller. And that includes actually 59% of Republicans. So that's a big change. The truth is that the Democrats cannot avoid this idea of possible impeachment for Donald Trump. I mean, the polls are showing it, that people are asking that question. They expect the Democrats to pursue this kind of thing. And so if the Democrats want to gain any political capital or credibility during this crisis, then, you know, they've got to look where the electorate is going, and it's telling them that they need to start talking about these things. Okay, so the latest breaking news is that Trump actually tried to fire the special counsel, Robert Mueller. And that is according to several reports, including NBC News, that Donald Trump ordered the firing of special counsel Robert Mueller last June. But then Trump backed off when his White House counsel threatened to resign. And that's according to a source that NBC News has first-hand knowledge close to the White House. So Mueller is, according to this story, leading an investigation into Russia's alleged interference in the 2016 presidential election and whether there was any collusion with the Trump campaign. And during that, Donald Trump decided that he wanted to fire him. So the New York Times, which first reported Trump's order, cited two people who said that Trump had argued that Mueller had conflicts of interest in the case and that it disqualified him from overseeing the investigation. So according to the New York Times, Trump's reasons for wanting Mueller fired last June included a past dispute allegedly involving Mueller over fees at Trump National Golf Club in Sterling, Virginia, when Mueller was FBI director, that Mueller could not be impartial because he had most recently worked for the law firm that had previously represented the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and because Mueller had been interviewed to return as the FBI director the day before he was appointed special counsel in May. White House counsel Don McGahn refused to ask the Justice Department to fire Mueller and threatened to quit instead. He told senior White House officials that dismissing Mueller would have disastrous effects on Trump's presidency, and that was confirmed to NBC News by an unnamed source. Apparently there are a lot of leaks within the Trump camp. Trump has called the investigation into potential collusion between Trump campaign's staff and Russia a hoax and a witch hunt, which I stated before, that Trump had said. Democratic Senator Mark Warner from Virginia is vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he said in a statement after the New York Times report that firing the special counsel, quote, is a red line that the president cannot cross, unquote. Which just makes sense. Otherwise, you're looking at a Richard Nixon style Saturday Night Massacre where he fires the Attorney General or whatever and the counsel. But according to Senator Warner, any attempt to remove the special counsel, pardon key witnesses, or otherwise interfere with the investigation would be a gross abuse of power. And all members of Congress from both parties have a responsibility, a very clear responsibility, in my opinion, to the United States Constitution and to the country to make clear immediately that any attempt to remove the special counsel would be a gross abuse of power. So Mueller was appointed to head the investigation in May by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and that was after Trump had fired FBI Director James Comey. Rosenstein appointed Mueller because Attorney General Jeff Sessions had recused himself from the case. So Mueller led the FBI for 12 years under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, by the way. 4 people connected to Trump or the campaign have been charged or pleaded guilty in connection with Mueller's probe already, some facing felony charges, including money laundering. Former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and his deputy Rick Gates were indicted in October on charges related to alleged money laundering during a time before they were part of the Trump campaign, and they have pleaded not guilty. Former Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, as did Trump's former national security advisor Michael Flynn in December. A White House attorney for Trump, Ty Cobb, great name, said in a statement to NBC News that, quote, "We decline to comment out of respect for the office of the special counsel and its process," unquote. And Cobb gave that same statement to the New York Times. In August last year, Trump told reporters that he never had plans to dismiss Mueller, despite attacking Mueller's investigation as a Democrat Party created fabrication. Quote, "I haven't given it any thought," unquote, Trump said of the firing of Mueller. Quote, "I've been reading about it from you people. You say, oh, I'm going to dismiss him. No, I'm not dismissing anybody." Okay, well, guess what? The latest reports are that that's not true. That Mueller actually did want, Trump did want to fire Mueller, but was blocked by his own counsel. So, wow, I mean, it's getting out of hand, folks. It definitely could lead to obstruction of justice. I mean, a lot of folks are looking into maybe the money laundering angle, which is what Steve Bannon seems to be all up in arms about. But it may be something much more simple than that. It may just be, you know, the attempt at the cover-up which creates the obstruction of justice charges, which would be impeachable offenses. And then, you know, the folks, the Republicans in the Congress are going to have to decide at that point, are they going to stand for justice and accountability? Or are they going to back off and vote against impeachment and run another risk in a long series of risks of losing their credibility as a truly conservative party that stands for the United States Constitution and the rule of law? So, according to the New York Times, Trump ordered Mueller fired, but he backed off when his own attorney said that he was going to quit. So there's also a very good story that CNN put together, at least a good analysis. It puts some of this stuff in context, and it's called Five Things Trump's Attempted Firing of Robert Mueller Teaches Us. And according to their analysis, President Donald Trump ordered the firing of Special Counsel Robert Mueller last June, only to be talked out of doing so when White House General Counsel Don McGahn threatened to quit rather than to carry out Trump's order, the New York Times reported. And according to CNN's analysis by Chris Silizia, their editor-at-large, it's a, quote, wow. It's a wow, especially because time and time again over the past year, Trump and his senior advisors have insisted that he had never, ever, ever, not once even considered anything like firing Mueller. He said he hadn't given it any thought, and that was back in August, as I was talking about before. So, besides the fact that Trump, contrary to his public assertions, not only thought about firing Mueller, but asked that it be done, what else does the New York Times story teach us about Donald Trump? Well, number one, he has a tin ear. So, remember the timeline here. Trump fires the FBI Director James Comey in May of 2017. That same month, May 17th, Mueller is appointed as special counsel by Deputy Attorney Rod Rosenstein and tasked with overseeing the investigation into Russia's attempted meddling in the 2016 election and any possible collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign. So within a month, on June 14th, and when I say the Russians, you know, we're not talking about the Russian people, okay, we're talking about a select group of people, some who may be connected with the Internet Research Agency, which Twitter, you know, has basically eliminated their accounts, any related accounts to the Internet Research Agency, because it's considered propaganda now in the United States. But anyway, the Washington Post on June 14th reported that Mueller's probe had expanded beyond the 2016 election to examine potential obstruction of justice in regards to Comey's firing. And as far as I'm concerned, that's where the real fire is to any of this smoke. It's about obstruction of justice. There are many other things like collusion and, you know, election fixing and things like that that might be very, very difficult to prove. A lot of allegations about some kind of attempt to collude with a group of Russians. But obstruction of justice is very clear, and the law around obstruction of justice is very clear. So that's an easy case to prove. It's very clear that there's at the very least a giant conflict of interest here when Trump is trying to fire the special counsel, or, you know, did fire the FBI director because of their investigation into his administration. So another thing that CNN says is that Trump, he can be talked down. And what they mean by that is that there's a tendency to assume that once Trump makes up his mind, that it's a final word. But the Mueller episode suggests that's not really true, because McGahn essentially called Trump's bluff on Mueller. As a lawyer, he thought it was a bad idea that would create many more problems for Trump than it would be worth. So he said, you know, if you want him fired, do it yourself. McGahn also told White House officials that Mr. Trump would not follow through on the dismissal of his own, that the president then backed off. So, you know, according to CNN, that's instructive. Trump, despite the fact that he had convinced himself on some shaky evidence that Mueller deserved to be fired, he wouldn't do it on his own. He wanted someone else to do it. So another thing that CNN is saying is that Trump's top aides have no real idea what's going on, and they admit that might seem harsh, but candidly, in their opinion, it's the best case scenario to explain the fact that several of Trump's top aides repeatedly insisted over the past year, including well after June 2017, that the president had never even considered firing Mueller, would never do that. So as the White House has consistently said for months, there is no consideration of firing the special counsel, and that was according to Ty Cobb, as we said before, in December, 6 months after Trump reportedly was thinking about it. So how to reconcile these quotes with the Times reporting? Well, either Conway and Cobbs and others who said very similar things were lying, or they just weren't looped in that Trump had, in fact, wanted to fire Mueller and only stopped when McGahn refused to do his dirty work for him. So that's instructive, according to CNN. And another thing, Trump's lawyers are telling him that the investigation is almost over to keep him from firing Mueller. This is an idea that CNN is putting out there, and they're quoting the New York Times story, where it said, Mr. Trump has wavered for months about whether he wants to fire Mr. Mueller, whose job security is an omnipresent concern among the president's legal team and close aides. The president's lawyers, including Cobb, have tried to keep Mr. Trump calm by assuring him for months, amid all these new revelations about the inquiry, that it's almost over, so he should just sit tight. And CNN says, we've known for a while now that Cobb and others have been assuring Trump that the Mueller investigation is winding down and there's just no real evidence to back up any of the claims. So now we know why, because by telling Trump, according to CNN, this is what they're saying, by telling Trump that it'll be over soon, that way his lawyers can keep his tendency to want to fire Mueller at bay. So why fire someone and make yourself look guilty when that same person is about to declare you innocent, right? That's that line of thinking. And this is according to CNN. I don't know if I completely agree with this, but according to CNN, just a few more days, weeks, months, and this will all be over, so there's no need to do anything rash, Mr. President. That's what they tell him. And in so doing, they think they're buying more time to let Mueller actually do his job. So what does that say about the president's own aides and advisors? I mean, if they're actually trying to protect the special counsel who's investigating them. I mean, this is really wild stuff. No one could have written this. I don't think Shakespeare could have come up with anything this outlandish, ridiculous. Certainly, you know, some of the best fiction writers would be astounded, I think, to see the details of all this. But bottom line, I think actually where Donald Trump is most vulnerable, and I've been saying this in the last few MTC reports, is on the obstruction of justice issue. Because, you know, when you fire the FBI director, I'm just saying, listen to what Comey said. Really, like, go back and listen to the transcripts or read them, and you will hear a man, Mr. James Comey, who is pretty self-righteously indignant about what happened to him, and his reputation is on the line, and he's not going to back down. So he's the one who was saying, I hope there are tapes, right, with the conversation between Comey and Trump about the investigation. He made it very clear that he felt that he was being pressured unduly and irresponsibly and potentially illegally by the president to back off of the investigation, which is why he began to take those notes. He said that himself during the Senate Intelligence Committee hearings. So that's where he was coming from. He was trying to protect himself And a lot of people were trying to figure out at the time, and it was like, well, what is Comey's deal in all this? I mean, what is his real agenda? His real agenda is to expose the fact that there's obstruction of justice that's gone on in the United States government and through the White House. That's what James Comey was trying to tell the country. And that's now what's coming out in the Mueller investigation. So, yes, there are many other side issues. There's money laundering. There's, lying to the FBI. There's all sorts of things that have gone on. And 4 people, at least, are facing charges in the Trump administration for various things that were uncovered during the Mueller investigation. But the real issue here is obstruction of justice. And that's probably what could cause the president's resignation or impeachment or some major constitutional crisis, because if the special counsel wants to, and if a special prosecutor is appointed, they could actually bring charges against the president while he's still in office. And that would be just an incredible clash of powers within the United States system of governance. Because then basically you would have the courts and the Justice Department against the executive branch, which they are a part of. Right there is a conflict of interest, right? It could go to the Supreme Court. Now, in the United States, the Supreme Court has made some decisions over its history, including the Citizens United decision and the selection of George W. Bush as president, that have made progressives really wonder if really this is a right-wing U.S. Supreme Court. So you may not want to rely on that if you're a liberal or progressive, to decide this issue. But it could be a constitutional crisis. If obstruction of justice has been committed by the president, then it is a criminal and a impeachable offense. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC Report. Thank you so much for listening and checking out what I have to say here. I'll continue these reports, trying to focus in on the most important issues that I see before us in the news, which is breaking, daily, and try to stay away from a lot of the pack mentality of the media and get sidetracked by all of the innuendos and nuances and tangents that go on during these kinds of news stories and investigations. But there's some very basic issues here, and that has to do with obstruction of justice and what the president's relationship is with the Department of Justice and whether he has the ability to interfere in an investigation of his own administration. So this is Mark Taylor-Canfield. If you like what we're doing, please like this video. That would be great, and share it on social media so other people can find out what we're talking about here. That really helps. This is totally independent, so this is just a journalist, trying to tell you the truth as he sees it from this point of view up here in Seattle, kind of a little bit isolated from the rest of the country in our own way. A little bubble, I admit, but we have our own perspective here, and I have my own after years of journalism, and this is what I'm seeing. So I just wanted to share it with you, honestly, with no filters and nobody paying the check. Okay, so support us. We appreciate it. Support as much independent media as you can. It's very, very important in the United States right now, where we're ranked 43rd in the world in terms of press freedom by Reporters Without Borders, which is something I'm not very proud of. We need to do much better. But yes, support independent media as much as you can. Spread the word and share these videos, and back at you. We'll see you next time. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC Report.
Is it possible for a president to, quote, obstruct justice? That's the question a lot of people have been asking since former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. We've also learned that Donald Trump knew about the lying before he asked James Comey to let Michael Flynn off the hook. Now, after a series of explanations, John Dowd, the president's personal attorney, has come up with a fresh answer. He says, quote, the president cannot obstruct justice because he is the chief law enforcement officer under the Constitution and has every right to express his view of any case, close quote. That basically means that the president cannot be charged with obstruction of justice because he's the president. Now, some legal minds agree with that.
You cannot charge a president with obstruction of justice for exercising his constitutional power. There's never been a case in history where a president has been charged with obstruction of justice for merely exercising his constitutional authority.
If this all sounds a little familiar, it's because it echoes something that former President Richard Nixon said after Watergate.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
During Watergate, the question was, and it's a question that still rages today, can a president be charged in criminal court? The Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel concluded back in 1973, during Watergate, that the Constitution forbids the indictment or criminal prosecution of a sitting president. In 2000, that same office reiterated those views. But the assertion that the president cannot be criminally charged for any offense has never been tested in federal court. If Special Counsel Robert Mueller decides to test whether a president can be charged and prosecuted in regular criminal court, it would likely fall to the U.S. Supreme Court to decide whether that is indeed constitutional.
MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. We offer you independent voices and underreported stories about topics you won't hear anywhere else. Join us as we delve into the deeper issues behind the news stories of the day on the MTC Report.
Mr. President, this morning on Twitter, you were referring to the testimony of James Comey vindicating you. But I wondered if you could tell us in person, sir, why you feel that his testimony vindicated you when it's really boils down to his word against your word. And if you could also tell us, sir, do tapes exist of your conversations with him?
Well, I'll tell you about that maybe sometime in the very near future. But in the meantime, no collusion. No obstruction. He's a leaker.
I don't recall it.
He's a leaker.
I don't recall it.
He's a leaker.
I don't recall it. I don't recall it. I don't recall it.
I know I was fired because of something about the way I was conducting the Russia investigation was in some way putting pressure on him, in some way irritating him, and he decided to fire me because of that. I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting. I was so stunned by the conversation that I just took it in.
I don't recall it. I don't recall it. I don't recall it. I don't recall it.
He's a leaker.
I don't recall it.
He's a leaker. He's a leaker. He's a leaker. He's a leaker.
I don't recall it.
He recalls absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
He recalls absolutely nothing.
Nothing. I do not have any recollection. I do not remember. I did not remember that. If I had remembered it, or if it actually occurred, which I don't remember.
He's a leaker. 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 He's a leaker.
Because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
I don't recall it. 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 I don't recall it.
I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting. That combination of things I'd never experienced before, but it led me to believe I got to write it down, and I got to write it down in a very detailed way.
It is overwhelmingly clear that there have been and continue to be those in government who are actively attempting to undermine this administration with selective and illegal leaks of classified information.
I still do not recall it.
Mr. Comey has now admitted that he is one of these leakers.
And the only thing I could think to say, because I was playing in my mind, because I could remember every word he said, I was playing in my mind, what should my response be?
He's a leaker.
The president tweeted on Friday, after I got fired, that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation. There might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to.
Not to my recollection. I don't have any recollection. I don't know. I don't know. Well, I'd have to rack my brain, but I don't.
No collusion. No obstruction. He's a leaker. He's a leaker. He's a leaker. He's a leaker.
It's Lordy, I hope there are tapes. It's Lordy, I hope there are tapes. It's Lordy, I hope there are tapes.
Nothing. Nothing.
I did not have any private meetings, nor do I recall any conversations with any Russian officials at the Mayflower Hotel.
Nothing.
Did. I don't know about these reports. I don't recall it. I don't recall it. It's conceivable that occurred. I just don't remember it.
It's Lordy, I hope there are tapes. It's Lordy, I hope there are tapes. It's Lordy, I hope there are tapes. It's Lordy, I hope there are tapes.
I don't recall it.
No collusion.
I don't recall it.
No obstruction.
I don't recall it. I still do not recall it. Not to my recollection. I don't have any recollection. I don't know. I don't know. I don't recall it. 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 I don't know. I don't recall it. I don't recall that. At this moment, I don't believe so. I don't recall whether that was discussed or not. I don't recall that being discussed. Of the meeting, I don't recall.
Lordy, I hope there are tapes. Lordy, I hope there are tapes. Lordy, I hope there are tapes. Lordy, I hope there are tapes.
Recall it. Don't think I do not have any private meetings, nor do I recall any conversations with any Russian officials at the Mayflower. Recall any such conversation. I don't recall it.
He's a leaker. 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 He's a leaker.
And so I thought it really important to document.
No collusion. No obstruction. He's a leaker. He's a leaker. He's a leaker. He's a leaker. He's a leaker.
Have no recollection of a discussion. I don't recall any such meeting.
About the nature of our meeting?
I don't recall any such meeting. I don't recall any such meeting.
Nothing.
I don't recall it. I have racked my brain and I do not believe so. I don't recall any such conversation. I don't recall it.
He's a leaker.
I don't recall it. I don't recall it. I don't recall it.
He's a leaker.
I don't recall it. I don't recall. I don't.
That's amazing. I mean, that's amazing law because he recalls absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
I remember saying, I agree he's a good guy, as a way of saying I'm not agreeing with what you just asked me to do.
No collusion, no obstruction. 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 No collusion, no obstruction.